The battlefields of the Orion front had been burning for 7 long years. For most soldiers, it was just another planet claimed in the endless war between the Galactic Union and the Swarm. But for the human known as Commander Elias Wren, this planet had been his proving ground, his burden, and his prison. When he first came here, humanity was still young in the eyes of the galaxy. Other species had advanced technologies, great fleets, traditions older than the Earth itself. Humans were latecomers, strange, bold, and often dismissed as reckless creatures. But Elias had changed that. In the trenches of Orion IV, with his armor dented and his weapons running hot, he had led the charge against enemies that were thought unbeatable. His stubbornness, his strange human courage became legend, and yet legends weigh heavy. That day the camp was quiet after the fighting. Smoke drifted from the ruins, and the soldiers, alien and human alike, tended to the wounded or whispered the names of the fallen. Elias stood apart, his armor still scarred from the morning's battle. He removed his helmet and stared at the horizon, where the Swarm's last ships had burned away into the black sky. He did not hear her at first. The voice of Captain Lyra, commander of the Solari contingent, cut into his silence. She was tall, her scaled skin catching the firelight, her posture sharp as ever. She had fought beside Elias for years, and once he had thought they shared respect. But her words carried none of that. "You are reckless, human," she said coldly. "Every order you give is born of madness. You treat life like it is nothing but a coin to be spent. You throw your soldiers forward not caring who dies as long as you stand victorious. That is not leadership. That is barbarism." The words hit harder than any plasma strike. Elias turned to face her. There was anger in her yellow eyes, but also something deeper. Fear, perhaps, or disappointment. The others nearby paused their work, pretending not to listen but unable to ignore the clash between the two commanders. "You think I don't care?" Elias asked quietly. His voice was low, almost too calm for the battlefield around them. "You think I don't count every life lost, every face that doesn't return from the fire?" Lyra's expression hardened. "You count them, perhaps, but you never stop. You never slow. You would grind every soldier here into dust if it meant one more victory for humanity's pride." The accusation cut deeper than she knew. For years, Elias had carried that doubt within him unspoken. He had driven his people forward, yes, but not for pride. At least that was what he had told himself. Humanity needed to prove itself. Every battle was a test. Every victory meant Earth would not be dismissed or ignored in the Union halls. Every loss would prove the old whispers true, that humans were reckless children playing with fire they did not understand. He clenched his fists. Around them the fires crackled. "You don't understand," Elias said. "We don't have the luxury of waiting centuries to be respected. Every world we fight for, every soldier we lose, it's the price of being seen. If I stop, if I show weakness, humanity will be left behind. And then what? When the Swarm comes again or something worse, who will stand with us? Who will care?" For a moment, silence hung between them. But Lyra did not soften. "You always speak of humanity," she said bitterly. "But what of the rest of us? The Solari, the Karash, the Ilan, all who bleed beside you. Are we nothing more than pieces in your human story? Must we all be sacrifices for your kind to feel strong?" Elias's throat tightened. He looked around at the camp. Soldiers from 6 worlds were there, tending wounds, repairing gear, sharing rations. They had followed him into battle, some because of his orders, others because they had come to believe in him. And now, through Lyra's words, he saw their faces differently. How many of them had died not because of the Swarm, but because he had demanded more than they could give? How many had he pushed past their limit, because he was too afraid to let humanity look weak? He felt the weight of his armor pressing on his chest. The once proud plates now looked like shackles. For a long moment, Elias said nothing. Then slowly he reached up and released the clamps on his chest plate. With a dull thud, the armor fell to the ground. The sound startled those nearby, and heads turned toward him. Lyra watched in shock as Elias removed piece after piece. The gauntlets, the greaves, the shoulder plates each dropped with finality, until he stood in only his undersuit, scarred and weary. "You're right," Elias said at last. His voice trembled, not with weakness but with the force of a man admitting something he had hidden from even himself. "Maybe I've been fighting for the wrong reason. Maybe I've made you all carry my burden without asking if it was yours to bear." The camp was utterly silent. The crackle of fires, the distant hum of machines, the soft whimper of the wounded. all faded beneath the weight of his words. Lyra blinked, unprepared for his surrender. She had expected denial, anger, perhaps even violence. Not this. Elias looked at her one last time, his eyes filled with both pain and strange relief. If my way has cost more than it's worth, then I won't force it on you anymore. Then he turned away. Barefoot, unarmored, he walked slowly out of the camp. No one moved to stop him. No one spoke. The legendary human, the commander who had carried victory after victory on his shoulders, was leaving, not defeated by the swarm, but by the harsh truth spoken by an ally. And yet as he walked, some felt a strange unease. For even without armor, even stripped of command, Elias did not look broken. He looked like a man walking into something greater, though none could yet name what that was. Behind him, his armor lay abandoned on the dirt, a relic of a chapter ending. Ahead, the shadows of the alien wilderness stretched wide and uncertain. The galaxy had not yet seen the last of Elias Wren, but in that moment, all anyone could remember was how silently he had placed down his armor and walked away. The wilderness of Orion 4 was no place for the unprepared. The air was heavy with smoke from the burning war machines, and the ground still trembled with distant explosions where the swarm retreated into the mountains. But Elias Wren walked without hesitation, his bare feet pressing into the ash and soil as though the battlefield no longer belonged to him. He carried no weapon, no armor, only the weight of his thoughts for hours. He moved through the ruined forests, past broken trees and shattered craters. The silence of war's aftermath was strange. There were no birds, no insects, only the echo of wind through blackened branches. He should have felt vulnerable without his armor. But instead, Elias felt strangely light, as if some invisible chain had finally fallen from him. Yet peace was not what followed him. Memories chased him step by step. Faces of soldiers he had led, voices of those who had believed in him, and the words of Captain Lyra. He had been called reckless before. He had been accused of risking too much. But never had someone he respected looked at him and said those words with such truth. Barbarism. The word stung more than all the others. Still, Elias did not stop. He had left the camp behind, and with it the eyes of his soldiers. Out here there was no legend, no commander. Just a man stripped bare walking into the unknown. By nightfall he reached a ridge overlooking a valley scarred by battle. Fires burned in distant wrecks, but the stars above shone clearly, bright against the black of space. Elias sat on the rocks, gazing upward. He thought of Earth then, a world small and fragile compared to the endless empires of the galaxy. He remembered the first time he had been told that humanity was nothing but a minor race, one more voice among thousands, destined to be ignored. That was why he had fought so hard, why every victory had mattered so much. But now, sitting alone, he wondered if respect had truly been worth the cost. The sound of footsteps broke his thoughts. Elias turned quickly, expecting perhaps a patrol of swarm stragglers. But instead, a figure emerged from the darkness. It was not Lyra nor any Solari soldier. It was a different face, a young human private no older than 20, his uniform torn, his rifle missing. He looked startled to see Elias, but also relieved. "Commander Wren," the boy said, almost whispering, "You're alive." "I thought I lost everyone in the charge." Elias frowned. He had left camp to be alone, but fate had delivered company. The private was trembling, his body bruised, his hands scratched raw. "What's your name, soldier?" Elias asked. "Marcus Hale, sir," the boy answered. "I got separated when the flank collapsed." "I thought the swarm had me, but—" I kept running. Elias studied him carefully. The boy was barely more than a child, his eyes wide with both fear and desperate hope. He reminded Elias of the first recruits who had followed him years ago, full of fire and belief. Many of them had not survived their first battle. "You shouldn't call me sir," Elias said quietly. "I'm not your commander anymore." Marcus blinked in confusion. "What do you mean? You've always been our commander. You can't just—" "Stop." Elias looked back at the stars. "I can, and I did." The boy shook his head, stepping closer. "No, you don't understand. People follow you because you do what no one else dares. I wouldn't have made it through training without your stories. They said you never backed down no matter the odds, that you made the impossible happen. If you're not our commander, then what am I supposed to believe in?" The words twisted in Elias's chest. He had walked away to escape the burden, But here it was again, carried in the voice of a single soldier. "Belief is dangerous, Marcus," Elias said. "It can blind you, make you follow someone into fire without thinking if it's right. Maybe that's what I've done all along, led people into fire without letting them see the cost." Marcus hesitated, but then his jaw tightened. "Maybe, but without you, a lot more would be dead. Without you, maybe the Union would have abandoned us here. You say we pay a price, but without you, there wouldn't even be a chance to pay it. We'd just be gone." Elias closed his eyes. The boy's words were simple, perhaps even naive, but they struck deep. For all his doubts, for all the pain of Lyra's accusation, he could not erase the truth. People had survived because of him. Maybe not all. Maybe never enough. But some. He sighed heavily. "You should go back to camp," Elias said. "The others will need you there." Marcus shook his head stubbornly. "Not without you." Elias almost laughed, though it came out hollow. The boy's loyalty was both touching and painful. He wanted to tell Marcus that legends were lies, that heroes were built on the bones of those who followed. But the boy's eyes were filled with hope, and Elias found he could not destroy that hope, not tonight. Instead, he stood. "Fine," he said. "But if you follow me as a man, not as a commander. Understand?" Marcus nodded quickly, though Elias knew the distinction meant little to him. Together, they left the ridge and walked deeper into the valley. The stars above guided them, and though Elias did not know where the path would lead, he felt something shift inside him. Maybe this was not the end of his story. Maybe it was something else, a beginning he had never expected. The night was long and shadows moved in the distance. At times, Elias thought he saw shapes lurking, swarm scouts perhaps, or worse. But they did not approach, and the two humans pressed on. By dawn, they reached a river, its waters glowing faintly under the alien sky. Marcus collapsed beside it, drinking greedily. Elias knelt too, staring at his reflection in the rippling surface. The face that looked back was weary, lined with scars, but still unbroken. He had abandoned his armor, abandoned his command, and yet even stripped bare, there was something in his reflection that refused to die, a stubborn fire that no words, no defeat could extinguish. Elias Wren was still human. And for all the galaxy's doubts, that still meant something. Behind him, Marcus spoke softly. "Where do we go now?" Elias did not answer at once. He watched the river flow, endless and unstoppable, carving its path through stone and soil. Finally, he stood. "We go forward," he said. It was not a plan, not a strategy, but it was enough for now. And as the sun rose over Orion IV, painting the battlefield in pale light, Elias Wren walked on, no longer the commander of legends, but a man searching for what it truly meant to fight, to lead, and to be human. The sun of Orion IV climbed higher, casting its pale orange light across the valley. Elias Wren and Marcus Hale followed the river, their footsteps slow but steady. The sounds of war had faded behind them, leaving only the whisper of water and the rustle of alien trees. For the first time in years, Elias was far from command, far from soldiers' eyes. He had thought he wanted this silence, yet it weighed on him heavier than any battlefield. Marcus walked a few steps behind, still limping from old injuries. The boy carried no weapon, yet he carried faith in Elias as if it were a shield. That faith made Elias uneasy. Every time Marcus stumbled and pulled himself back up, every time he looked to Elias for direction, Elias felt the invisible chains of responsibility tighten again. By midday, they found shelter beneath the remains of an old Union supply post. The small structure had been bombed in the early weeks of the campaign, its walls cracked and its roof scorched. But it still offered shade, and they needed rest. Elias sat against the wall, his body aching in ways he had ignored for years. Without armor, every scar was more visible, every bruise more raw. He felt less like a commander and more like a tired man. Marcus sat opposite him, fiddling with a shard of metal scavenged from the wreck. "Why did you walk away?" Marcus finally asked. Elias closed his eyes. The question had been waiting since the moment the boy had found him. He had no easy answer, but the silence between them demanded something. "Because words can cut deeper than blades," Elias said at last. And hers were true. "I've led too many into battles they could not survive. I thought I was fighting for humanity, but maybe I was only fighting for myself. So I walked away because I could not carry that weight anymore." Marcus frowned. "But you saved lives too. You gave us victories no one else could. Doesn't that count?" Elias gave a tired smile. It counts. But the dead don't care about victories. The ones left behind don't always see glory, only graves. The boy looked down, silent. Elias almost regretted saying so much. He had wanted honesty, yet honesty could break the hope Marcus carried. Before the conversation could sink deeper, a sharp sound echoed from the woods. Elias raised a hand, motioning Marcus to silence. He crouched low, scanning the tree line. His body reacted on instinct, the soldier in him refusing to die even without armor or rank. Figures emerged, 3, moving carefully, weapons in hand. They were not swarm. Their bodies were lean, covered in pale scales, their eyes narrow and wary. Solari scouts? Marcus tensed, ready to speak, but Elias held him still. The Solari spotted them quickly, leveling their rifles. One barked a command in their language, sharp and questioning. Elias raised his hand slowly, stepping into view. "We're not your enemy," he said. The scouts exchanged quick glances. Then one of them stepped forward, his weapon still aimed. "Elias Wren," he said in accented Union tongue. "Our captain thought you dead or deserter. Why are you here?" The name cut like a blade. Elias heard the word deserter and felt shame ripple through him. Yet he did not flinch. "I walked away," Elias admitted. "I am not your commander." "Not anymore," the scout sneered. "Humans are strange. You fight until nothing is left, then abandon what you built. Our captain was right, you are reckless." Elias might have bristled once at such insult. Now he only bowed his head. "We want no trouble," he said. "We seek only to pass." The Solari studied him, their suspicion sharp. Finally, they lowered their weapons, though not their distrust. "Then pass quickly. But know this, our captain has not forgiven you. She says your fire burns allies as easily as enemies. Perhaps she is right." With that, the scouts vanished into the trees, leaving behind silence heavier than before. Marcus exhaled. "They hate you," he said quietly. Elias sat back down, his face unreadable. Maybe they should. The rest of the day passed in weary travel. Elias thought often of Lyra, her sharp words, her piercing eyes. Even now, her shadow stretched over him. She had not been wrong. And yet a part of him whispered that walking away was not the end, only a pause before something greater. He did not know if that was truth or arrogance. By nightfall, they found another ridge. From its height, they could see a distant settlement, small with scattered lights glowing faintly against the dark. It was not Union, not Solari, a neutral outpost perhaps, or a colony clinging to survival on the war-torn planet. Marcus pointed eagerly. Shelter. Maybe food. Elias nodded, though unease coiled in his chest. Neutral settlements were dangerous. Some hated soldiers, blaming them for endless wars. Others hid informants or thieves. Yet Marcus needed rest, and so did he. They descended carefully. The settlement was ringed by crude barricades built from scrap metal and broken vehicles. As they approached, wary faces appeared behind the defenses, humans to Elias's surprise, though worn thin by hunger and fear. One stepped forward, an older woman with silver hair and tired eyes. She carried a rifle, though she held it loosely. "Travelers?" she asked, her voice hoarse. "Yes," Elias said. "We mean no harm." Her gaze lingered on him, sharp and suspicious. "You look like a soldier." "I was," Elias admitted. The woman studied him a moment longer, then sighed. "Soldier or not, if you bring food or skills, you're welcome. If not, you can rest one night, but no more. We have little to share." Elias bowed his head. "Rest is all we ask." They were led inside. The settlement was little more than a cluster of shelters, smoke rising from small fires where families cooked thin meals. Children watched them with wide eyes, some curious, some fearful. Marcus moved among them, smiling, offering small words. His youth made him less threatening. Elias stayed back, watching quietly. The people here were fragile, yet their survival spoke of quiet strength. They had no armies, no fleets, only stubborn will. In them, Elias saw a reflection of humanity itself. Not grand, not glorious, but enduring. That night, as they lay in a borrowed shelter, Marcus whispered, "Do you think they know who you are?" Elias shook his head. "It's better if they don't." But even as he said it, he wondered how long anonymity could last. For better or worse, his name had weight. To some it was hope, to others a curse. He could not escape it forever. Sleep came slowly. Dreams brought faces of the fallen, voices calling him back to battle. He woke before dawn, breath heavy, heart pounding. Outside, the settlement stirred. Smoke rose as fires were lit. Elias walked to the edge of the barricade, staring at the horizon. The war still raged out there beyond sight. He had walked away, but he knew it was not done with him. Behind him, Marcus approached. "You're thinking of going back, aren't you?" Elias did not answer. He only watched the rising sun, knowing that choice still waited for him, heavy and unrelenting. The morning air of the settlement was cool and crisp, carrying the faint scent of smoke and wet earth. Elias Wren watched as the people moved quietly among their makeshift homes, each person performing tasks with a precision born of necessity. Some tended small gardens, others repaired damaged shelters. Children laughed softly as they chased one another, their carefree joy fragile in a world so often harsh. Marcus stirred beside him, yawning and stretching. "They don't seem afraid of the swarm," he said. Elias shook his head slowly. "They've learned fear is useless if it stops you from living. They survive because they adapt, not because they hide." The boy nodded thoughtfully. "We could learn a lot from them." Elias remained silent, watching the settlement. He had expected fear, distrust, perhaps even hostility. Instead, he found a quiet dignity in survival, a reminder of what humanity could achieve when it refused to surrender to despair. As the day progressed, the settlement welcomed them with caution but practical kindness. They shared thin meals of rationed food and offered small blankets for warmth. Elias noticed how the people worked together, each contributing in some small but essential way. No commander dictated their actions. No soldier enforced order, yet the community endured. Later, while Marcus rested, Elias wandered toward the edge of the settlement. Beyond the barricades, the valley stretched wide, scarred from countless battles. Smoke rose in the distance where the swarm had left remnants of their machines. And somewhere beyond, the galaxy continued its relentless war. Elias had thought walking away meant leaving responsibility behind. But here, among these fragile humans, he realized the truth. Responsibility did not vanish with distance. It followed like a shadow, reminding him of every life lost, every choice made, and every hope left unmet. A sudden noise made him turn. From the trees, a figure emerged, cautious but deliberate. It was a man, armored lightly, carrying supplies. His eyes widened as he recognized Elias. "You," the man exclaimed. "I didn't think anyone survived the flank." Elias's eyes narrowed. "Who are you?" The man introduced himself as Lieutenant Garrick, a Union officer who had been separated from his unit. His journey had been long, dangerous, and lonely. He spoke quickly, his words tumbling over one another as he recounted the hardships he had endured, the swarm attacks and the desperate fight to survive. Marcus listened wide-eyed, absorbing every detail. Elias, however, studied Garrick with careful consideration. The man's story was genuine, but his presence complicated things. News traveled fast, and if Garrick spread word of Elias's presence, or worse, his decision to leave command, the settlement could be in danger, and Elias's fragile anonymity would be broken. "I am not leading anyone," Elias said quietly, his voice firm. "Not now, not ever." Garrick paused, confusion evident in his features. "You're Elias Wren, the human commander who led Orion Free's defense. People are counting on you." Elias shook his head. "People will survive without me or they will not. That is not for me to decide anymore." Garrick frowned, disbelief plain. "You can't walk away. You can't. Humans like you, you're what keeps hope alive. Without you, we're just another lost unit in the galaxy." Elias looked at him, the weight of truth pressing down again. "I walked away because hope can be dangerous if it blinds you. I have seen it cost lives. Marcus has seen it, and Garrick, perhaps you are seeing it now. Sometimes the best hope is survival, not glory." For a moment, Garrick said nothing. Then he nodded slowly, understanding but not fully agreeing. Survival alone was not enough for some, but he saw Elias's point. That evening, as they shared the settlement's meager meal, an alarm rang from the perimeter. Elias rose immediately, Marcus at his side. The people moved quickly, blocking the barricades, weapons drawn. From the shadows, a small group of swarm scouts emerged, curious and daring. They did not yet realize the humans in the settlement were not armed like a battlefield unit. But the instinct to protect surged in Elias. He grabbed a broken metal rod from the ground, tossing it aside as his body surged forward. With Marcus close behind, he intercepted the first scout with precision and instinct. The swarm attacked in their predictable patterns, but Elias moved like a man who had survived countless battles. Every strike was careful, measured, and effective. Marcus, though untrained, followed his lead, defending himself with courage born of faith. The settlement joined the fight, not out of skill but sheer determination. They hurled stones, blocked paths, and created distractions. Elias realized then that leadership did not always need titles or armor. Sometimes it was about showing people they could survive and fight together. By nightfall, the scouts were driven back. The settlement stood battered but undefeated. Elias, bloodied and bruised, looked around at the people who had survived because he had shown them how to fight, not with grand strategy, but with courage and presence. Marcus approached, awe shining in his eyes. "You didn't just survive. You helped us all survive." Elias's chest rose and fell heavily. "It wasn't me alone. It was all of us. Every life mattered tonight, not just mine." Silence settled over the settlement. The people looked at him differently now, not as a commander, not as a legend, but as a human among humans, leading by example, inspiring without demanding. That night, Marcus spoke softly. "Do you think Captain Lyra would understand?" Elias shook his head, smiling faintly. "Perhaps. Or perhaps she would still call me reckless. But that doesn't matter. We survived, we lived, and that is enough for now." The next morning, Elias stood at the edge of the settlement once more, looking out at the valley beyond. Smoke still rose in distant craters, the swarm still roamed parts of Orion IV, and the war continued. Yet here, in this small settlement, he had found something he had almost forgotten: humanity's resilience. He knelt by the river, letting the water flow over his hands, washing the dirt and blood from the night before. Marcus joined him, splashing water lightly on his own face, laughing despite the hardships. Elias felt a strange warmth in that laughter. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to believe that survival was not enough of a struggle, but also a triumph. Humanity had endured before, and here it endured again, not through legends, not through armors, but through courage, hope, and stubborn hearts that refused to break. Elias rose, water dripping from his hands. "We move forward," he said, echoing his words from days before. "But this time we move together." Marcus nodded. Together. And for the first time, Elias did not feel the crushing weight of expectation. He felt responsibility, yes, but not the unbearable kind. Here he could teach, guide, and protect, not for fame, not for glory, but for the simple, undeniable truth that humans endured when they refused to surrender. The sun rose higher over Orion IV, painting the valley in gold and shadow. Elias Wren, bare of armor and stripped of command, walked at the front of the small group from the settlement, Marcus at his side. The galaxy might still see him as reckless, as stubborn, as dangerous. But here, among the humans he had chosen to protect, he was more than a commander. He was a symbol of what humanity could endure, and perhaps even inspire in others. And that symbol, Elias realized, was stronger than any armor he had ever worn. Days passed in the settlement, each one slower and quieter than any battlefield Elias had ever known. Yet the calm was deceptive. The scars of war were never far, and the distant roar of battles beyond the mountains reminded him that survival here was temporary. The galaxy moved on without pause, and humanity's struggle continued elsewhere. Elias woke before dawn as he had for years, though now without the weight of armor pressing on his chest. He moved silently to the edge of the settlement, watching the horizon light up with the first hints of sun. The valley below was peaceful, yet the scars of war were evident. Craters and burned trees testified to battles fought and lives lost. Marcus emerged from the shelter, rubbing his eyes. "It's beautiful," he whispered, his voice full of awe. Elias nodded. "It is, but beauty does not erase pain. We remember both, Marcus. That is how we survive." They spent the morning helping the settlement rebuild, repairing walls, clearing debris, and assisting with the small gardens that sustained them. Elias noticed how each person contributed. No one forced, no one ordered. Leadership here was not about rank or fear. It was about presence and example. He guided, instructed, and supported, but he never commanded. By midday, a messenger arrived, a scout on a hoverboard speeding down the valley toward them. Elias recognized the emblem of the Union, though the young scout looked tense, his eyes wide with urgency. "Commander Wren," the scout called, halting before the settlement. "Captain Lyra sent me. She wants to speak with you. The war is moving fast and your input is required." Elias froze. Even after walking away, the galaxy still demanded his presence. He had hoped to remain in obscurity, to rebuild a sense of purpose quietly, but the call of duty was persistent. Marcus glanced at him nervously. "Do you go back?" Elias studied the scout, then the settlement. The people here had survived because he had taught them courage, yet he could not abandon the galaxy entirely. Responsibility was not a burden he could cast aside forever. "I go," he said finally, "but not for glory, not for legend. I go because the lives of many depend on it. Not just mine." The scout nodded, relief flooding his features. "Captain Lyra waits at the base near the northern ridge. She will understand your reasons, I think. But she wants your judgment." Elias gave a faint smile. "Then we leave at once." As they prepared to depart, the people of the settlement gathered to see them off. Children waved shyly. Adults nodded in quiet respect. Elias felt a strange pride, not of conquest, but of survival. He had walked away, yes, but he had left behind more than memories. He had left behind courage, hope, and example. The journey to the northern ridge was long, but uneventful. The scars of battle stretched for miles, and Elias moved through the land with quiet awareness. Marcus stayed close, alert and eager, learning again that leadership could exist without titles, that courage was not measured by victories alone. When they reached the base, the Union banners were stark against the sky. Soldiers moved with precision, reports were shouted, and machines hummed with constant activity. Captain Lyra stood at the command center, her eyes sharp, her posture rigid. Yet, when Elias approached, something softened in her gaze, a recognition not of rank but of survival, of human resilience. "You returned," she said simply. Elias bowed his head. "I never intended to disappear forever. I only needed to see the cost of my decisions and to understand what leadership truly means." Lyra studied him, her face unreadable. Then she nodded. "I spoke harshly to you because I care for the lives that follow your lead. I see now that you carry that weight with every step. You walked away to learn perhaps what none of us could teach you on the battlefield." Elias allowed himself a small smile. "Perhaps," she gestured toward the map display. "The swarm moves again. Our forces are stretched thin and your experience is needed. But I will not demand blind obedience. Lead as you choose, human. I trust you understand the value of life now more than ever." Elias looked at the display, seeing the vast expanse of Orion, the Four, and beyond. The galaxy was not forgiving, and the swarm would never rest. Yet he no longer felt the same weight of expectation pressing him down. He had walked away once, and that act had taught him more than endless victories ever could. "I understand," he said. Marcus, standing beside him, whispered, "Do you think you'll be the same?" Elias glanced at him, his eyes reflecting both weariness and determination. "No, I am not the commander I was. I am something more and perhaps something better. I know now that armor does not make a man. Courage does. Compassion does. And humanity, our stubborn will to endure, does." The following weeks were difficult. Elias led small units, advised on strategy, and ensured that each operation minimized unnecessary risk. He refused to treat lives as expendable, even when the galaxy's politics demanded sacrifice. His decisions were slower, more thoughtful, and the soldiers who followed him began to trust him not only for his victories, but for his humanity. Marcus learned beside him, observing, asking questions, and slowly becoming a soldier shaped by example rather than orders. He understood that being human meant more than fighting. It meant knowing the value of life, of courage, and of hope. Elias and Lyra spoke often, sometimes heatedly, sometimes quietly, sharing lessons learned, regrets, and visions of what humanity could become. The sharp words that had once driven Elias away no longer wounded him. They guided him. They reminded him that even the harshest truths could teach wisdom when accepted. One evening, as the twin moons rose over the base, Elias stood alone on a hill overlooking the camp. The wind carried the scent of smoke, metal, and earth. He thought of the settlement he had left behind, of Marcus, and of the countless soldiers who had survived because humanity refused to be small. He realized then that walking away had not been an act of cowardice. It had been an act of courage. To face oneself, to examine the weight of leadership, and to return on one's own terms was the bravest step a human could take. The galaxy was vast, filled with alien species, endless wars, and constant challenges. But Elias Wren understood something that no armor or weapon could teach. The human spirit was unyielding. It was flexible, clever, stubborn, and brave. It endured, inspired, and changed the world simply by refusing to surrender. He turned, heading back toward the camp. Marcus followed, silent and attentive. Behind them, the stars glimmered, the twin moons casting their pale light over a war-torn land. In that moment, Elias did not feel fear or regret or exhaustion. He felt human, and being human, he knew, was enough to face any challenge. The next campaign would be brutal. The swarm would return, stronger and more dangerous. Alliances would falter, and countless lives would depend on the choices of a single human. Yet Elias Wren walked forward with quiet confidence. He no longer needed armor to protect him, nor legends to define him. Humanity itself was his shield, and the courage of those who followed him was his weapon. In the heart of the galaxy, a human had walked away and returned stronger, wiser, and unstoppable. And in every step he carried the simple truth that defined his kind. Survival was only the beginning. Courage, compassion, and the stubborn will to endure were what made humanity a force to be reckoned with. Elias looked toward the horizon, where smoke rose from distant battlefields. He would fight, he would protect, and he would inspire, for he had learned that legends were not made in armor or accolades, but in the choices that define a life. And that, he thought, walking into the sunrise was more than enough.